Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to QAfeteria Tech Talks number 5 this time. So yeah, we already are at number 5, still keeping them once per month. And in this May edition, let's all see what we have prepared for today. Maybe a couple of words about EPAM. So this year we're celebrating our 30th year anniversary. It all started in 1993 with only 3 employees. And over the years, we came to the great number of 59,000 employees. Today, in first quarter of 2023, you can see that we are spread in more than 50 countries and regions, and we have over 51,000 engineers. And our engineers work in like very great variety of industry verticals. We do work for customers in travel and consumer segment, financial services, business information and media, life sciences and healthcare, software and high tech, and emerging technologies. Our revenues and I guess most of our clients are either in Americas or in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. As for the EPAM itself, the company is spread in more than 50 countries and regions, which you can see here on this map. It's in most European countries, North and South America, Asia, and even Australia. Today, what we have for you is a great presentation from one of our speakers, Denis Belozerskiy, who is a quality architect at EPAM, and he will be sharing us insights into software testing practices of the world's top IT companies. So I believe it will be very interesting for everyone. And don't forget, in the end, we'll have a Q&A session, but be free to ask the questions also during the presentation, and we'll be addressing them. So on to you, Dennis.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet all you here. I hope you are not very tired. As it was mentioned, my name is Denis Belozerskiy. I am a quality architect at EPAM, have more than 12 years experience in testing at all and 6 years experience in EPAM. But today we will not talk about my experience, but I would try to share experience of testing in biggest IT corporations in the world. It's not too easy to find the information about testing in the companies, especially up-to-date information. So if you have any other interesting information to share, please let me know. Yeah, as you can see, we will talk about Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and Spotify. And probably let's start from Google. For Google especially, it was easy to get information about the testing because there are 2 books. One is fully about testing in Google, but it was written more than 10 years ago. Despite that fact, it contains interesting and still valid information. The second one is about software development process in Google. It's also a very interesting book, but obviously it contains a section about the testing as well. Testing at Google is a part of centralized system which they call development productivity, and later we will see why they call testing development productivity. But Larry Page, one of the founder of Google, said that scarcity brings clarity. It means that when you have lack of something, you need to be very careful with it, think twice to use it effectively and efficiently. That's why by default, teams at Google doesn't get testers, and the team need to find strong arguments and deserve to get testers in it. It's very different from we usually have on our project. And on the question, what is the secret of testing at Google? He answered, don't hire too much testers. Every engineer at Google is tester. Oh yeah. Yeah, actually, every engineer at Google is tester. What does it mean? They have developers, uh, they have testers, and they have test automation engineers. But they say that every engineer is tester. They mean that every developer is responsible for quality. It's actually not something new for some projects, but in common, not on every project it works, I guess. For instance, in EPAM. Yeah, getting back to the Google, if there is a test word in the position title, like test automation engineer, it means that such person helps others to perform good testing. It doesn't mean that test automation engineer write automated tests. Mm, You probably heard many times that, and I already mentioned that quality is not equal to testing, and not only testers are responsible for testing. Mm, If the product initially has very poor quality, if it has not testable architecture, testing probably will not help. That's why engineers at Google are more focused on avoidance of defects. Instead of finding the defects, they are focused on mm, finding the actually fixing the process to and adjusting the process to find defects early instead of fixing the bugs in the process and in the product. The next, I wanted to talk about the engineers' roles which Google has. Actually, we already mentioned that they have developers and they have people who are working on testing and test automation. There are classical developers. They create new features, add new functionality to application which goes to clients. But developers in Google also create a lot of testing code, not only unit tests. We will talk about it a bit later, but Google doesn't call tests unit integration end-to-end and so on. Instead, they call the tests small, medium, and big. But the interesting fact here is that developers is responsible for all code, as I mentioned earlier, which he or she touch. It means that if developer creates some feature and the feature breaks any test, developers go to the test and fix it. Again, it's not very common in our project, I would say. So not testers fixing the test, but developers. The second role in Google is software engineering test. Some time ago, it was innovative role, but now EPAM also has such a role for a few years. Probably you know that. But in Google, it's a bit different role. The focus of software engineering test is on testability of code. As I mentioned earlier, it's not about creating the test, but making the developers code testable and creating the testing infrastructure. So software developer and test, as stated in the title, is also developer. And actually, in most of the companies we will talk about today, the developers, the testers are with developer background, and they pass the same interview. Yeah, as I mentioned, software developer and test is a developer, but he pays special attention on code quality, on the testing risk, analyzing architecture from testing perspective, making the testable, and so on. So software developer and test makes everything to make application testable. That developers can easily test the application. That's actually why the testers are related to developers productivity branch in Google. Uh, as I said, software engineer in test work with the same production code, but he's interested in testing coverage improvement, testing approach, finding maybe better solution, application quality, instead of new features development. They do everything to make testing process easy. The developer can fully test code by himself. Um, as I mentioned again, under everything, I mean the developers create tools, tools for testing, tools for monitoring, and so on. And the last role in Google is actually not the last. I don't think that they have only three roles, but the three main roles that they have is test engineers. This role is related to software developer in test, but the focus is again a bit different because these people are focused on end user and only after that on developers. So they are experts in the product, and people in this role are also developers. They know programming and write a lot of code, but again, it's more code of different auto tests. Also, they organize testing work. They also provide consulting related to product quality. As you can see, the roles are names of the roles are similar to what we have here in EPAM and in other companies, but the focus and the work that people do is a bit different. A few words about organizational part of testing. They say that the structure when developers and testers report to the same project manager works bad. It's because usually such team is led by people who were previously developers and they prefer to develop more features than to work on product quality. So in Google, hierarchy is a bit different. As I mentioned earlier, testers belong to development productivity branch, and this branch exists in parallel with developers and has its own manager. And the testing team is temporarily assigned to developers team and they report to separate manager. The fact that it's separate team allows testers to rise obviously that it's independent team and it helps to write questions for quality, for security, performance, and so on. They also say that such scheme allows to keep small number of testers. I believe that it's because all the people in Google are developers, so and developers do almost everything, doing testing and so on. That's why they can allow them to have a small number of testers. So now let's talk about testing types. Probably many of you know that Google doesn't have unit integration end-to-end tests, as I mentioned earlier. Instead, they divide them small, medium, and big. On this slide, you can see what does it mean. A small, medium, and big. It's not about test size directly, but it's more about what this test covers. It's very similar to standard classification, but probably again, all you know that under the same term, different people means very different and can mean very different. For instance, let's take integration tests and even unit tests. Integration, I've heard many times that people call the test integration and they mean very, very different things. For instance, it may be integration of two classes, two units, or two systems. It's absolutely different tests, absolutely different scale. So it's very different test, right? And if we call it everything integration, it's very hard to understand from the first experience what a developer means. So they decided not to confuse when people change project. Also, they have very smart test run system. On the next slide, probably you will see that actually, yeah, they have, yeah, and let's maybe talk about. You see that small tests it works only with one small unit. There are rules what can and what cannot small, medium, and large tests do. We will not talk about them now, but you can see that for small tests, it cannot talk to network, for instance, for database. It's something local and in memory for the Medium, it can talk to real database without mocks, but again, there are some limitations. And large tests, it's really very similar to end-to-end tests. And yeah, regarding the test execution system, if the tests execute for some longer period than it's expected, the execution system will break the test. A few words about the testing pyramid at Google. They follow it for many years, and in one material I read that the distribution is 70% for small tests, 20% for medium, and 10 for big. I believe that it may change from project to project, but in general, you can see that they write a lot of small tests and not relying on end-to-end tests. Actually, when I prepared this presentation, I was really surprised that in that book I mentioned initially is mentioned that Google also at the beginning had an issue with quality. Developers didn't cover code with tests. The tests were flaky. People didn't execute or didn't use test results and so on. And they started thinking what to do with that. So they decided to apply a very interesting solution. It's implementation of testing certification. It was like a competition. They proposed every team to become certified. In addition to interesting competition, they gave small gift after that competition. They like have a gradation. The team is certified with first, second, third level of quality, and it was interesting for teams to achieve that level. And yeah, they also gave a small gift. It's a ball which shows the build state. I don't know if you know, but yeah, here you can see some execution rules. That small tests will be broken in 1 minute, and medium in 5 minutes, and so on. Yeah, regarding the certification, EPAM, I wanted to say that EPAM also has similar program. It's called NGIX certification. If you haven't heard about that, you can read by the link below. I'm not sure that it's still valid. Maybe it was changed some time ago, but anyway, EPAM also has that practice, and it was very interesting. It's not about testing, but it's about the whole maturity of development processes, including testing. What else interesting about Google? The book's author said that to be good testers, you need to have management, analytical, and organizational skills. That's why many Google managers came from testers, and it's interesting. I don't know how many EPAM's managers comes from tester. It's interesting to get that statistic. Also, author explained why it's bad to create big test plans and how to create test plan in 1 day or even 10 minutes. It's very interesting again, looking into this very big test strategy created by templates and so on. They say that it's not useful. So the book, the two books contains very interesting information. So you also can see that EPAM took many things from Google. For instance, the assessments procedure to get new title, which some people really hate, also came to us from Google. Probably that's it. Yeah, probably that's it from Google. If you haven't read the book yet, I would suggest reading them. They contain a lot, as I mentioned, a lot of interesting information, and they are very useful to get some practices in your work practice. Let's switch to the Facebook. Unfortunately, there are no any books about development in Facebook. At least I have not found such book. But there are a few articles from insiders, and first of all, I found that sometime ago, before the 2014, Mark Zuckerberg often repeated the mantra that move fast and break things, what means that we need to go very fast, we don't need to pay attention on quality. But as I said, it was before 2014. Why it stopped working after? Actually, it's very simple. It's because mobile market, mobile devices market, mobile phones, and so on, started growing, and the approach which worked for web didn't work for mobile. Probably you have ideas why, but let's talk together. It's because it's much easier to fix web version than mobile version, because in mobile, you need to install your application on device. Users need to press some button. There are a lot of devices, etc. So if you find a bug, fixing the bug, it's not as easy as for web version. Yeah, so generally speaking, the process is much, much more complex. So they came to a very simple conclusion. It's crucial to find defects before they are released to production. Uh, One more aspect why quality become more and more important, because we need to consider Facebook's scale. They have billions of users, and if less than 1% for some applications, maybe a few users, for Facebook it's millions and even tens of millions of users. Uh, Even though it's not the platform to manage nuclear station, if something goes wrong, they lose a lot of money. So obviously they need to do something with testing. Facebook has continuous deployment. It means that every pull request automatically goes to production. And with such approach, you can imagine how many challenges are related. Challenge actually with testing, but probably not only with testing. To make this approach works well and deploy every pull request automatically to production, they need to be very carefully tested. But again, take into account Facebook's scale, they currently have more than 100,000 pull requests every week. How to test it? How to test? How to do, I don't know, 100,000 of regressions per week. Facebook also doesn't have separate testers or automation engineers. All developers are responsible for covering code with tests, execute, and fix tests. You see that it's very similar to the approach used in Google. But Google at least have people whose specialization is testing. For Facebook, I have not found such information. Nowadays, no one is surprised with AI usage, ChatGPT, and so on. But Facebook used AI for many, many years. In the blog, here is the link shared on the screen. They have a technical blog. You can read some interesting information there. And in that blog, they share their experience involving AI in different development aspects, including testing. You can see the picture on the right, code base from the Facebook. Here you can see interaction of different tools. There are many mention of tools called Sapiens in orange here. It uses so-called search-based software engineering approach, which use search algorithm and AI, ML, CV, and so on applied to solve software development problems. It is very knowledge-intensive area, but since Facebook is very big company, they have a lot of money, so they solve this issue in other way. They just bought a company who was developing that Sapiens tool. Mm, And what actually is that Sapiens? Sapiens is the system which generates and execute tests. I'm said generates, and they really generates tests. It can execute tests written by human, but it also generates tests by itself. It was really surprise for me. Authors say that tests generated automatically by the tool are more stable than tests written by human, less fragile, or even cheaper. In addition to that, they have a system which is able to analyze how new code changes affect existing system and finds precisely the test which can cover all the changes affected by new code. So They probably have a lot of tests, but they not execute all the tests they have. They have a smart analysis algorithm how to find the code affected by that change and execute only that test. Probably also you have heard about testing accelerator EPAM develops. It's called Drill4G, but I believe Facebook has much more complex solution for that. All these approaches allow Facebook to catch more than 99.9% of defects before the code go to trunk and become visible to other engineers. And it's not even before the code deployed to production and stay visible for end users. If you know about the metric defect containment effectiveness or the opposite one, defect leakage, the target of it usually is 95%, and we consider it as a good level, green level, but even 99.9, it's fantastic result, I would say. And one more interesting thing about the testing related tools in the Facebook is that they have a tool which can automatically generate fix for the bug. The tool uses mutation algorithm to generate a few versions of code fix, execute the test for every option, as we discussed the Sapiens tool, and choose the best option. So everything are prepared, and for human, it's only approve that fix. It's really sounds like a fantastic. It's less fantastical because we know about ChatGPT and so on, and we used to that. But a few years ago, it was really fantastic. Regarding the deployment process, they widely use canary releases and beta testing. It's so-called shift-right testing when beta testers are real users. You may see for other companies as well that for Facebook scale, it's very hard to emulate uh, environment production like. For instance, if they need to do performance testing, it's hard to create the same infrastructure they already have, right? Because they have data sensors through all the globe, and they need to duplicate them to just to execute the performance test. So that's why they use production as an environment to test the changes, but they test it gradually. If you heard about Kent Beck, the author of the Extreme Programming, it's a very famous person in software development. He also worked in Facebook. He said that Facebook spends a lot of efforts to use feature toggling approach when every feature may be enabled or disabled independently. So when they deploy a new change to small number of users, they use monitoring to see what happens, and if something goes wrong, they just disable new change. With such intensive development and hourly releases, they cultivate DevOps culture. If you still if you still think that DevOps is a person who set up pipelines in CI/CD and so on, I would highly recommend you reading one more book. It's called The DevOps Handbook, and you will probably change your thoughts about that. All the approaches and tools which I mentioned for Facebook are not new. They are widely used in production for more than 5 years. So you can see that they really heavily use modern approach, artificial intelligence, and so on. Here you can see, as I mentioned, how the popularity of mobile devices and platforms grows through the time. Yeah, let's switch to the Microsoft. Actually, when I prepared section about the Microsoft, I have not expected surprises from this company, but I was really surprised. Here, I want to ask you about the DevKA ration in Microsoft. Have you heard about it? Yeah, it's on the screen, but anyway, in different sources, you may see that Microsoft takes quality very seriously. That's why they have one tester per one developer. You may also heard that they were pioneers in moving from separate testers to software developer in test role. They actually renamed this role. They were first who renamed the role to SDET and so on. And as I mentioned, it was very surprised. I was very surprised preparing the presentation because the ratio one tester to one developer has not existed in Microsoft since I don't know, maybe 5 years or more. Moreover, Microsoft doesn't have testers at all. Literally, they do not have testers, and they say that there is a huge problem when testers are separate people in the team or even separate department, because in that case, developers don't test features thoroughly because they know that between them and end users, there are testers. So developers just throw build through the wall, as it's the quote from Microsoft, and wait for the feedback. Microsoft says that the problem became worse with cloud technologies, so they solved the issue radically. They proposed all the testers become developers. It's not developer in test and so on. It's real developers who develop features or leave the company. As actually simple as that. So now they don't have testers at all, as I mentioned. Now quality is really everyone's responsibility because there is no testers. So developer understand that he is the last person who will touch this code, and that's why it need to be very good, uh, very well tested, very well covered by automated tests. Yeah. That's why developers think about testing and testability from architecture perspective from the very beginning. The approach when developer is responsible for the testing as well, they call combined engineering. Uh, but testing by developers is only part of the change. The other part is also moving testing to real users on production. It allows to get feedback from real users very fast, and it's actually what the all companies wants. But I also read about the issue related to this approach, and the main issue here is that the quality is really degraded. Now it's probably better, but some time ago it was really very bad. One on forum in the internet, former Microsoft testers complained that everything become much worse. In forums, you can see that if people asking if do Microsoft test the product and do they have testers, they say yes, they have testers, and now the testers are end users. In one of the article, I read that Microsoft is not happy with this new approach, with this reorganization, and they think what to do with all this. So maybe they will return back to the real testers. Amazon. The main principle in Amazon is deployment comes first. They release very often, as probably Facebook and Google. For Amazon, the average release cycle is 11 seconds. It means every 11 seconds they deploy something to production. Regarding the testing, they say that they have perfect deployment process and they don't need to have complex testing suite. More important for them is to simplify deployment process and in case of some failures, being able to roll back fast, ideally automatically. So Amazon is the company which probably refused the classical testing process. Instead, they changed the development approach. They were one of the first companies who started migrating from monolith to microservice. And probably you could see a few weeks ago, there was an article that they started on one of the projects. They started moving to other direction. They started to migrate microservices to monoliths, and there are a lot of advantages related to that. They saved a lot of money. It's very interesting because the whole world is moving to microservices from monolith, but Amazon started moving to other direction. All the teams in Amazon are independent and autonomous and responsible for service end-to-end. They have a dedicated zone of responsibility. So the teams develop functionality, test it, deploy it, and even communicate with end users. I mean, support the microservice they develop from that perspective as well. They also say that deployment is a pessimistic process, so that's why they always find the reason to file the deployment either in pre-production or in production. If something is wrong, automatically rollback happen. All the aspects of software development is on the team. As I mentioned, they are autonomous. It means that team should be responsible for architecture, security, performance, and all other aspects. It's responsibility of the team. They have actually separate architects, security specialists, performance specialists, but the goal of, again, as in Google, the goal of that people are not creating and doing the work by themselves, but their goal is to teach the team. They educate the team to do the job right. Regarding the manual testing in Amazon, it's almost absent. They do manual testing only for physical devices like Kindles and so on. Probably the last one, but not the least. I believe you heard many times about interesting organization of software development lifecycle in the Spotify. They actually started with Scrum, but they quickly realized that rules are very good for the beginning, and sometimes you need to break the rules to move faster. So they made all the practices optional, like estimations, task breakdowns, sprint planning, and so on and so on. They decided that agile matters more than Scrum and principles are more important than Scrum practices. They started calling the Scrum teams squads. Probably it's a famous word if you are interested in the development. And the key driver for that was, again, as for Amazon, was autonomy. But I believe that for Spotify, the squads are much more autonomous than teams in Amazon. So what is squad? It's self-organizing team with its long-term mission. As I mentioned, with very high level of autonomy. Autonomous means that squad will decide what to build, how to build, and how to work together while doing it. Spotify says that autonomy is very important because it motivates people making decisions faster because it happens inside the squad. So there is no long chain of communication. All the big companies actually tend to standardization and the processes and bureaucracy, but instead Spotify goes in opposite direction. They have very low standardization, and the process depends on squad. So in one squad, they can work with Scrum, and other in Kanban, and one squad they do planning, and in other not. As all the rest companies we reviewed today, Spotify says that releases should be small and happen very often because in that case it may be tested better. So they heavily invest into test and release infrastructure, test automation, and continuous integration to make release process routine. They say let's make actually the release process routine and not drama. They are not preparing to the release as some very important event. It's just daily routine. They are very focused on motivation, community, and trust rather than structure and control. And here is the structure. They cultivate culture of experimentation, fail fast, and no blaming. It's very popular actually in other companies as well to build this culture of trust when you can experiment, when you are not afraid of breaking something. The only thing I need to say, a big part of the culture of this experimentation culture is learning from failures. For every failure, they conduct postmortem. It's not about whose fault was it. It's about what did we learn? What will we change? They say that, guys, we need to fix process, not product. It's not enough just to fix a bug in the product, but you need to think how to avoid it in future and how to change the process to avoid that bug. So we decided actually squads, but it's not as simple. You can see that they have not many, but some other interesting names of the organizations like chapters, tribes, and guilds. I will not stop here in details. You can read and find a lot of information about that in the internet. It's quite popular organization. Just can say that it's about horizontal relations between people. In different teams, they share professional expertise, and also again you can see that testing organization is a bit similar to what we have in EPAM. It's matrix structure, a lot of communities, a lot of communication, horizontal connections between people. So it's very interesting that we have something from every company. It's the last slide from my side, the conclusion. We reviewed very different companies, but you can see that on high level, they are very similar and they use very similar approach, despite the fact that they have very different business process and so on. They heavily utilize DevOps principles. They release very frequently on the production. It's many times a day. The testing mostly is done by developers. Developers' responsibility is to test the code, and testers just help developers to test their code. And they also widely use testing on production, shift right, and so on. And also you can see that EPAM takes the best practices from they to become better, to improve production quality. That's it from my side. Thank you very much for your participation, for your time at evening. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. I see some.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Dennis. Thank you very much. It was really cool to see all these practices. This would be actually really interesting, like to spend some time, maybe in each of the companies. It could be a book material.
Yeah, it's very interesting how they do,
Yeah.
how they move, and how we can
Mhm.
actually take that practice and improve our process.
Mhm. Maybe about that, like, how do you feel like these top companies, like, can these testing practices be kind of scaled down to some startups, some smaller companies, or is it more like for big projects?
There is a very good sentence I've heard that to solve problems like Google, you need to be Google. Because actually on some scale there is no problem, there are no problems which Google tried to solve. They will be on higher scale, and this actually movement from monolith to microservices is not always actually good idea, I would say. There are some limitations and so on. That's why it was popular, because the companies like Amazon and Google start moving because they really have a huge product. But when you have small product, maybe you don't need. But yes, for some practices may be used, I guess. It's very useful to help developers to test their code, to create more tests, to um, teach developers thinking about testing in advance, for instance. So I believe, yes, it depends on actually on the product, on the project, on the people who are working on the culture on it. But I see that many companies and many projects in EPAM, many customers also use that processes. They started implementing this DevOps, not implemented, but following the DevOps culture. So I believe some of them may be not useful for small companies, but I selected the probably the most useful, the most interesting, which can be easily implemented.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, we can at least try it and see
Yeah, for
how,
sure.
how it how it
Again,
behaves.
about this experimentation culture, as I mentioned for Spotify, why not?
hmm Okay, so let's see. One of the questions. So, do you see this transition from manual testers to more like tester developer role as some future or current trend? So,
Uh,
how doable is it?
I actually can say that I had it in presentation, but I remote before the presenting it. But yeah, in some article or even in the book, probably someone from these famous companies mentioned that manual testing as a like testing, it's doesn't make sense because in this agile, not agile, but in this fast releases, there are no place to manual testing. There are actually, it's not possible to do that. Maybe some um, exploratory testing, but it's not about that. Manual testers can help developers to know the product better, and manual testing is more about now. It's more not about just clicking the interface and so on, but it's more about expertise in product, I would say.
hmm Okay, and tell me, like, do you know like anything about the interview process in these companies for testers? Like, how does it look like?
Unfortunately, no, I don't know anything. Never interested in that. Maybe someone from our
Mhm,
guests worked in the Microsoft or Google or
mhm.
Amazon and can share, but I don't have any experience with that and
Yeah.
haven't read
I
about it.
suppose it's pretty much like it should be similar to like developers since they're
Uh, yeah,
searching for that profile.
yeah. As I
Mhm,
mentioned, some companies even do not separate the interview process. They actually have interview on developer role, and after that you can have just specialization in testing. You're working as a developer, but you help developer to create a testing tool, for instance. But you need to be developer. You need to know the development. For Microsoft, they for sure don't have any difference. They don't have testers. That's why they don't have any difference in testing interview. I would say that
mhm,
there should not be any difference
mhm.
between developers.
Although there is something also interesting where from your presentation, what you said that in Google, like most managers come from testing.
Uh,
Do you have an idea like why would that be in
mm,
your perspective?
I probably mentioned that many, but not.
Okay, many.
Yeah, it would be correct. I think uh, in the book they mentioned that I also said that people who works as a quality engineer, they have this analytical skills, they have organizational skills, because to test something you need to go to business analyst, you need to go to developer, you need to go to someone else, try to analyze everything. Probably from that perspective they actually mentioned that in book. I don't know.
Mhm. Okay, maybe it's a message for our audience. Stay in testing. You might end up as a manager in Google.
Actually, I saw in EPAM the same, but
Mhm,
I don't have any statistic. I saw that
mhm,
some very cool and high-level managers came from the testers as well,
mhm. Yep, EPAM also offers many opportunities.
for sure.
Though, yeah, our care practice is also very, very big. And like comparing all these giants, like what would you say? Like who has the best testing culture? Like, or is it even possible to assess?
Uh, I would say from my perspective, it's very hard to distinguish. I really like the Facebook approach. They also don't have testers, but they have very strong the culture of testing. They have these AI tools which supports testing and so on, but it's really hard to say because probably you need to work in every company and tell and evaluate that. For me, it's really hard to do.
Mm. Maybe as a user, it's like who has the most bugs?
Yeah, the same. Maybe
Uh,
not Microsoft, not
yeah.
not the champion in that competition.
Yeah, and like, do these companies have you heard of some testing tools that they have maybe made open source or some of those
Um,
specific ones?
I know, for instance, that inventor of the WebDriver, he worked for some time, for a long time in Google.
Mhm.
Don't remember the name,
Yeah,
but
Simon Stewart and
yeah, yeah,
Jason Huggins, I think. Yeah, I
yeah.
believe. Yeah, they both met at Google.
Mhm, probably yes. So I know about that. It's not actually was the invention of Google, but they invested a lot in that.
Mhm.
Um, from top of my head, it's hard to say. I don't know, but I know that actually that companies like Facebook, like Google, not sure about Amazon and mm, Microsoft as well as the previous companies. They invest a lot in the tools and they make them open source. I'm sure that if you search, you will find a lot of open source tools for testing because it's very common for them not just storing this tool for them. I know actually that Facebook tool I mentioned, Sapiens, and the tool would generate something, test and fix. They are also probably open source.
Mhm. Okay, I'll have to take a look at that. Because it sounded really interesting.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so it's very popular for them to make open source.
Mhm.
So I just don't know the names because I was not prepared for that question, but I'm sure that there are a lot of tools for testing.
Mhm. Yeah, we have another comment from the chat. Like ChatGPT and AI became so scary.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, definitely is having a sort of an effect on testing, and yeah, who knows what will happen
Yeah,
in the future.
it's very hard. Before the ChatGPT, it was a bit easier to predict the future, but with ChatGPT, I don't know, it's very,
Mm,
very scary and very hard to predict anything.
yep, exactly. Okay, so I think we're coming a little bit to the end. So maybe one last question. So how is like, do you know how is Google doing their famous testing on the toilet since everyone is remote?
Uh, From Google, they were not real. Yeah, actually, I forgot to mention that they are doing.
Yeah.
Actually, this practice, as I mentioned, they had a issue with quality, and they practice testing in the toilet, that
Yep.
block, and so on. It comes from that times when that had an issue. That's why they started popularizing
Mm,
the quality. They started to put in the brochures in the toilets to
mm.
people to be focused on the quality, and it's yeah interesting practice. I forgot about to mention about that. Yeah,
Yeah,
but they
I always found it a bit funny, but apparently it was effective as they used it over so many years. People
I think
liked it.
so. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I forgot to mention that Google is probably the most open company for their processes. You can they share a lot of information. They have a books. They have a blog testing in the toilet. You can check it. They share interesting articles there, I would say, and they show that actually they have the same issues as we have. They have an issue with testing stability. They have the approach we use for fixing the test and so on. But anyway, for those who don't know about that, please, it's very interesting blog.
Indeed. Okay, so I think that's it. So thank you very much, Dennis, once more. It was very interesting topic.
Thank you very much for
Yep.
spending your time here.
Yep.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Yeah, have a nice evening, everyone. Thank you for joining, and yeah, be sure to join again about in 1 month. I think we'll have one more session in June, and see you. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.